I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and with Reading Museum, and we are interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corp as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC's opening its first office in the UK in Reading. It's December the 5th, 2023, and we are in Reading. I'm here today talking to Angela Shaw. Angela, let's start with the basics, please. Just basically, first of all, your full name, your place, and your date of birth.
So I'm Angela Shaw, and I live in Reading still, and my date of birth is 61.
Okay, and let's talk a little about your how it started. How you started. Your life. Where what's your background? Where's your family background? Who are your parents, and what kind of schooling did you have?
So I'm originally from Scotland, as you might know from the accent. You might be able to tell. My dad is from Italy, so they came over around wartime. I'm from Ireland, both into Scotland. So I went to school in Scotland, left school at 16 because you leave a bit earlier there, and went off to uni. And it was in the sort of late 70s. Loved maths at school, went to uni, had a look around to see what I could do, and computing was, I think it was the second year of the course. They hadn't yet had any graduates, but because it was all new and shiny, I decided to do computing, computer science it was, at Strathclyde Uni. So that was a 4-year degree, and came out of there as one of the few people with computer science degrees at the time, so we were very sought after. We got lots of job offers. Yeah, so that's how it all started. I worked initially in a company in Fife called Photronic. They made banking terminals, and then came down south when I got married, and worked somewhere else for a couple of years, and then joined digital in the early 80s.
Okay. Tell me, let's go back a little bit there. So you did computer science at university. It was a new course. Were you the only woman on the course? Because we hear that.
No, interestingly, there wasn't many women. There was probably, maybe 20 out of 100, maybe 150 people. But interestingly, most of the women stayed on the course, whereas a lot of the course actually went from 150 down to about 40 people who did the final honours year. But almost all of the women were still there at the end. Almost everyone that dropped out were the guys. Still in touch with lots of them now. We meet up every month. We scattered across the world and we've come back again. And we still meet up on a regular basis. It was really lovely.
And was maths was your kind of way into computers, was it?
Yeah, in those days you didn't have computer science at school or anything like that. So it was more, you could do maths or you could do a maths-related degree. And I sort of wanted to do something, I think I was thinking about jobs at the time. I wanted to do something that was new and interesting, although I'd never touched a computer when I went to the course. It just looked like an interesting thing to do when I went to the open days.
And you were obviously, what was a computer science course like then? Obviously it must be very different to what it is today.
It was a really good course. I loved it because it had a bit of everything. So there was lots of programming. There was a lot of hardware stuff in it. So we did all the networking, the cabling. We actually, for my final year project, I built what's now a personal computer. So I bought a processor, I bought memory, hand-wired the address bus between them. Soldered all the chips into the boards. So it was like really down into the depths of it. We used assembler programming, we used 3GLs at the time, so for Pascal, Algol, things like that, back in the day. And it covered everything. It was lovely. It covered, all the nuts and bolts right up to how the networks actually worked. So there was a physical network and all the communication. It was a great course. It took us right down into the depths, which is what I really loved.
And what were your parents' backgrounds? Were they sort of technical people, mathematical people?
My dad's a teacher, but he's geology, so nothing really to do with, he was science, but nothing to do with sort of maths and computing. And mum was a housewife. So yeah, I'm one of 6 children. 5 of us went to uni, but very different. And my sister, who's older, is music. My brother, who's just a year older than me, started in law, but then he changed to computer science as well. So we actually ended up going through uni at the same time, different universities in Glasgow, but at the same time. But yeah, so there's really the 2 of us in computing.
So let's talk a bit about, this go forward. So you completed university and you got your first job. Your first job was Valtronic, I think you said?
Photronic, yeah.
Photronic. So tell me a little bit about them.
Photronic were a small company. They were in a place called Dalgety Bay in Fife. I was an assembler programmer, so I was writing code to make the banking terminals work, and the bit I worked on was printing. So I remember writing some code, and I remember the excitement when the printer actually printed a character, because they were the little terminals you get still in banks now where you flip your card and it prints up the receipt. So it was that printer that I was working on. It was great fun because we had to use things like proms at the time. So when I wrote the code, I had to download it onto a prom, and then that got plugged into the computer, and then we would run it and see what happened. And again, when you were debugging, it wasn't anything like now. I would literally put a little probe on the oscilloscope, and I would be counting the binary ones and zeros. Then I would translate that into hex, and then translate that into assembler, and that's how we sort of debugged what was happening. So very different to the world of programming now. I used to take proms through the airport, fly to Amsterdam, did some work with a bank out there, and that's how you took your code back and forward, by putting them on, blowing them onto these proms and taking them back and forward. So yeah, very different world.
So you're what age are you, 21 at this point?
Yes, I was 20 when I graduated. Well, 20 when I graduated. So yeah, 21, 22 at that point. Yeah, so it was early 80s.
What's the what is the workplace, the technology workplace like for a young woman at this role? Because there are obviously we perceive it in a certain way. Were you in a minority at this point? Were there a large number of women, young ladies, girls coming through at this point?
No, I mean I was very much a minority. I don't think there was another single female even in the company. So yeah, I think I was a bit of a what's the right word? I was sort of interesting because I was female, and also very young as well in the workplace. I also had skills that not many people had because I really enjoyed the assembler, whereas a lot of the guys at uni with me went off to maybe do marketing or the project management or something like that. But I really loved the detail. So I actually sat in a booth, these old cartoons you get where you have the partitions and there's just a tiny gap. So I sat in one of them and I programmed away. So yeah, it was very unusual. I was a bit unique at the time, which I think the company liked because it was quite nice for them to say, oh, we have a woman. But, I was very much on my own for a lot of it.
Did it ever sort of come up? We'll talk about this later, but environments where being a woman was kind of like an inhibitor to getting work done, or did it help get work done?
I think initially they probably judged, but once they got to know me, it didn't seem to get in the way. Maybe it was an advantage in some cases, like if we were doing, exhibitions or, something like that, maybe they, quite often I was on the stand to demonstrate stuff. Not so much for Tronic, because it was like get in there, program, and occasionally go to a customer site with some software. But in other jobs, I think if there was an outward-facing thing, sometimes they would pick me probably because I was young and female. Did it go against me? I don't know. I wasn't aware of it. I was aware I was different, but I wasn't aware that it held me back, I don't think. But for sure, it was very unusual at the time.
So let's talk about the transition to digital then. So you're at this company, Vatronic, in Scotland.
Yeah.
What were the circumstances in which you you worked for DEC? Take us through the process, how your interest was piqued and the process you went through.
So I moved down south when I got married, and I worked for a company called ITL, and they were in Winchester, and they did office automation software. So I was writing things like file system software, so the delete command, the move command, the copy command, and all about word processors, but kind of before Office was available. So it was a very early word processor, and lots of programming, but it was 3GL at that point. It wasn't assembler anymore. For ITL, after a couple of years, decided to move to Hemel Hempstead from Winchester, and although I wasn't made redundant, they offered the move to me. I actually chose to leave because I didn't want to go to Hemel Hempstead. So, quite rightly. So then I started looking around for a job. One of the people that I looked at was digital, and I just loved the idea. Both companies had been very small that I'd worked for, and I just loved the idea of working for a big company. And when I went for the interview, it just felt so good. It was so modern and so exciting to see all these people who were all sort of interested in the same stuff as me. And they had all-in-one at the time, which was obviously also office automation type stuff. So it meant that all my skills were relevant and I could take them across with me as well. So I did feel like I was bringing something, as well as, you know, them obviously giving me something.
Was there a job advert you responded to?
Yeah, it was Computer Weekly or Computing. I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of the two big newspapers at the time where the jobs were.
And the role, what was the role they were looking for?
I think it was, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I'm pretty sure I went in as a sort of programmer within All-in-One, because you used to customise it. So you would get the customers, the process flow of their business, and then you would customise forms and stuff so they could do business tracking and processing.
So we'll come on to All-in-One in a second. So what was the job interview process you had?
Oh, the process, I can barely remember it. I had a couple of interviews. So the first one, I think, if I remember rightly, was there was lots of people there. I think we did some sort of joint stuff. And then I got called in for a sort of one-to-one interview. I don't remember it in a lot of detail because it's a long time ago now. But I remember thinking how modern and exciting the place was. It sort of felt American as opposed to the sort of the more British companies. They were, I suppose, also going from being a programmer who was in a booth to an organisation where they didn't really have booths. Or the bit I was in, it was all open office and you could see lots of people. It just all felt very modern to me. I remember thinking that.
Was that what you saw in the interview? You got to actually see the offices?
Yeah. They must have walked me around an office, because I remember seeing and looking at it thinking, gosh, this is really modern.
Was that in Reading or where was that?
It was in Basingstoke, I think their interview was. Yeah, it was in Basingstoke.
So you meet and you had an interview, a one-on-one interview, and how did the interview go? Do you remember anything about the interview?
I remember thinking it went well. I don't remember a lot about it. I remember it went well, or thinking it went well, just coming out really hoping that they offered me the job. I mean, at the time, again, there were a lot of jobs around in those days. So, you know, I had different interviews, because obviously I was going to leave the company I was in. But, you know, it's never been difficult to get a job, because once you're in, you've got the experience, and I think it was a really good fit. And, you know, when we sat down to chat, it just felt like a really good fit.
And I think you said you'd been considering a job from IBM as well at the same time.
The IBM job was when I moved down with ITL. Theirs was a very different interview. When I went to them, it was is it Hursley? That's the right place. And I remember driving in and there was cows in the field, which felt really odd coming from Scotland. Not that we don't have cows, but you just don't have them in fields where your building is. But I remember going in there and it actually was very different. It was corridors of glass rooms. Everybody was in still partitions, but they were made of glass. And I remember in the interview, all the paper on the desk was turned over, so it was just blank on one side. And when I asked about the job, and they would say, "Oh, I can't tell you about the job. Oh, what will I be doing? Oh, we can't tell you what you'll be doing. Will you accept the job? Oh, you haven't told me what it is. I'm not going to accept a job if I don't know what it is." And then DEC was like just completely open and friendly and felt so approachable. And the IBM one, and again, I don't know if it's just the particular office I was in, but it was all very secretive and nobody really spoke to you. They were all in these little glass booths. So it just didn't feel friendly. So yeah, I didn't take that one, obviously.
Yeah. And did you have a sense of DEC at the time? Obviously, you saw the job come up in Computer Weekly or Computing.
Yeah.
And you liked the idea of working for a bigger and American company. Was there anything you knew about DEC itself, or you come across them during your research or preparation, or are you feeling as you would get in there?
I hadn't come across them massively. I knew of them, and I knew, again, at the time IBM were like big computers, and I knew that DEC had this mini computer. And you know, I started off with these massive mainframes, ICL mainframes, where you fed punch cards in and waited 3 days for the results to come back. So I knew about the really big ones, and then I knew IBM had big computers as well. And the idea of these mini computers, the PDPs, it just seemed like the next thing. So they just felt like they were further ahead. And although IBM were sort of trying to get into that space as well, they didn't feel like they'd moved. And again, digital felt more modern because of that. It sort of felt like they were looking to tomorrow rather than these big things.
And you joined in which year did you join?
I think it's 86.
1986.
Something like that.
Okay. And Did you go under? So you've joined the company. Did you undergo any training, orientation?
When I first started?
Yeah.
I can't specifically remember, but I will have done because I did loads of training when I was at DEC. They did some great training. I did lots of different things. I remember doing things like personal effectiveness for professionals and effective communication. I found it really hard to write memos, and I used to find all the sort of writing really difficult. And I remember they're so supportive that when I said that, they put me on this course, which was fantastic, and I've used it throughout my whole working life. But training was something that they did for me a lot of. I did a lot of stuff. Some of it was specific to the technology, and some of it was more generic. I actually did training when I was in DEC. So I used to do some work with Shire Hall at the time in Reading. So when they had big upgrades, they would get some of us to come in and do the training for them. So, I would be standing in Shire Hall with 300 people there and sort of delivering training for them on the technical side. So yeah, lots of training, and it stayed with me my whole career.
We hear lots about DEC that management put people forward for training, or you had the opportunity. How did it work? Would you sign up for things? Would managers say to you, I think you should give this a go?
Sometimes both. So sometimes it'd be something new coming out and they'd say, all right, we want you to be part of this. Can you go and do the training? And then usually bring it back and do some training in-house. And sometimes it was me saying, I'm really struggling with this part of, when I became a consultant, I was doing a lot of writing, and I did find it really challenging to get what was in my head effectively on paper. So then it was, there was loads of training available. So it was, let's have a look and see what's there. And I would just go to my boss and say, I found this one. And he would always just say, yep, go ahead, go and do it. And the quality of it was very good.
So it's interesting, obviously you had a maths background, so actual writing was a kind of written material was kind of a bridge for you to clear.
Yeah.
How did the training sort of help you to master that?
I mean, it was quite a long course. I think it was like 3 or 4 days, but I remember the things that stuck with me were things, just really simple things like, if you've got an action, put it at the top. They don't assume someone's going to read a page and then find an action at the bottom. And I've always done that from the minute I did the course. So if you ever get an email from me and it's got an action, it's right at the top and it'll say, read below for details. And then also things like, put yourself in the position of the person who's reading the document, rather than thinking of yourself as the author, think of yourself as the recipient. And again, it just sort of changed the way I wrote it. And then the third thing they said was, when you've written something, go through it and take out anything that isn't necessary. So I used to write loads and loads of stuff, and it just helped me sort of go, we don't really need to know that. Just put it at the bottom. If you want more detail, give me a shout. And it literally changed how I write. I mean, I went on to do a master's, and I had to write this massive thesis of 15,000 words, and I would never have done that before. And genuinely, that course really stuck with me, and it's really helped me.
So what materials were you writing that required you to have to?
Sometimes it was, I would say emails, but they weren't emails, they were actually written things at the time. Just any email, any document. So quite often I would be writing, so as a consultant, which is what I did in DEC, latterly, I would go onto a customer site, find out the solution to whatever problem they might have, and then I would have to write a report that then would be presented back to the managing director and whoever else had asked me to go in. So there was a lot of presenting what I found. And also some training materials. So again, when I was doing training, we would write, documents, and then they would get provided to other people for training. So yeah, some quite big chunky formal documents, and sometimes it's just a quick report. I was a project manager for a while, so again, you're writing status reports, updates, and it was just really nice to feel like you could get to the crux of it really quickly without lots and lots and lots of unnecessary words.
So let's talk about your career progression a little bit. So I think you discussed how you went to DEC as a programmer.
Yeah, I was a programmer.
But you became a consultant there at some point. At what point did that kind of happen?
Well, at first, I think All-in-One was quite new when I first started. So at first I was going on to sites and I would be told this is the spec of what they need. So it's basically a workflow of some business process. And I would program that in and put it in. And then after a few years, you get to know the product so well that, you'll be on a customer site and you would think, oh, do you know what? I can see over there that they could really do with this. So you start to see opportunities. So then I would talk to someone and that would come in. And then eventually they sort of say, oh, go and have a chat to them and see. And then eventually you become, I was one of the first people, not the first, but one of the first. There was 4 of us in the UK that worked on all-in-one, and we kind of became the experts because we were very early adopters of it.
So tell us a little bit about, so let's come back to this, tackle this now. So all-in-one was what? Because we hear a lot about DEC, it's the hardware and the PDP system and the back systems come up.
Yeah.
All-in-one, what's all-in-one?
So all-in-one was, it was like a workflow. It's a bit like office automation. So it would do your emails, it would process. So you would try and find a business process that was very complex, and you were moving effectively paper from one place to another, and it managed, you could program it to say, fill this in. Now it automatically goes to that person, and without their authorization, it won't go anywhere else, and then it goes to that person. So you were constantly looking at businesses to see where you could add value. Or you could just put it in and it had, word processors, email, spreadsheets, and it was very early days. So often when we went in, there was a typing pool who did all of the typing, and it was all done on paper, and all-in-one could automate all that, which often slowed them down to start with, because you're actually saying to someone who doesn't normally type, you can now type your own 3-line message and send it off yourself. So sometimes it got a bit slower to start with, and that's why you had the business process. It showed them the value of it. And once they'd done a couple of things, like stuff just tumbled in as to what they could do. I do remember once I went in, I can't remember the company, I think it might be British Aerospace, and I went in and the secretary said, will you please stop him sending his own emails? It takes him half an hour to write 3 lines, and he's not doing his job. And I can do it in 2 minutes, because he used to just dictate stuff on a dictaphone and give it to her. But he liked playing with this thing, and she's like, you're stopping him doing his job. You've got to stop him. Can you take away his password? Can you? So yeah, so it was it was very new. People didn't have email, they didn't have computers on their desk in those days. So it was very new.
That's an important point. What days are we talking about here where people didn't have this available to them?
I mean, this would be sort of late 80s. So the companies we would go into, maybe the secretaries would have computers, but the directors wouldn't. So, because they would just dictate or maybe handwrite stuff and pass it to their admin or their PA, and they would deal with all that stuff. So we were obviously saying, they could have one and they could do this with it and this with it. And as I say, sometimes it slowed them down, because actually they loved it. It was exciting. I mean, some of them didn't want anything to do with it, and it was a real battle to get them to use it. And again, that was where the business process thing came in, because if they had to authorize something, they had to use it. So it was finding that thing that meant that they wanted to use the computer rather than just the ones who loved it. So we had lots of different experiences.
How important was all-in-one? Because this is the 80s. Microsoft became very well known for the company with Office, as we all know.
Yeah.
And groupware was starting to come out in the 90s, wasn't it? With like Lotus and all those kind of things. How kind of ahead of all those guys was something like all-in-one?
I mean, it was ahead of them all. I mean, I remember Lotus 2020 came out, and there was also, I think it was WordPerfect came out. And it was around that time, but this one, the difference between all-in-one and all of those things, they were standalone, whereas this one pulled together your business processes as well. So as well as getting all that stuff, you could also map processes in, and that's what we were trying to do, was to sort of hook people in that way.
So when you say business processes, give us an example of what is a business process to people who won't know what that means.
So it was things like, you basically go into a business and something that was very complex, like maybe a bit of paper that had a signature and then it passed here and had another signature, but it couldn't go there until it had been to there. And so rather than passing paper around, we would automate it and put a form on their screen. So it might be something as simple as authorization to travel, or it might be something more complex, like depending on the business, if it was, I don't know, purchasing or just anything at all, financial authorizations, sometimes very specific to the business. So we would go in, we did some work for National Power. I can't actually remember what the implementation was, but it was getting the thing that they needed to use as opposed to just wanted to use. It was always easy to find it.
I mean, how important was this? How transformative was this? We hear a lot about business transformation today with digital, but this is at a time when the market for computers was so much smaller.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were very much paper-based, and computers were very small, had a small number of people in the organisation. How important was this to companies' organisation, this kind of work?
We were always looking at the business case of it. So we had to try and find a process that saved so much money that it paid for the products. And if they didn't have computing, it paid for that as well. So we would be cutting out typing pools, or cutting out, you don't need this level anymore because it can go straight from here to, you don't need to check it. Or sometimes we'd look at the process and it was really inefficient. And it's like, well, actually what you could do is go from here to here just with one step and not 6. So we were always looking for areas and ways that we could cut cost. And then we would justify the cost, because obviously you're buying stuff that you don't even know what it is. And sometimes we put it in and just have a go, just put it in a small little pilot and then see if it worked. So it was really important that they worked. So that then when that worked, you had to get a champion in there. We'd say, right, let's roll it out a bit further, let's roll it out a bit further. And it kind of grew. If you were successful in what you were doing, it grew very quickly because they could see the benefits. But of course, they didn't even know what they were because there weren't computers. So it was only by seeing it that they could see what a difference.
What was the response, obviously, to companies then? Obviously, you're helping them save money, but also become faster, I suppose.
Yeah.
So they were obviously very happy with what you're providing.
Yeah, I mean, we had this thing about if you produce rubbish and you put in a computer to do it, you just produce more rubbish quicker. So we had to make sure that what it was producing wasn't rubbish, and often you went in and the processes were not effective. So yes, you could make it faster, but they weren't getting any benefit. So there was a big thing about making sure that when you go in, this is where the consulting came in, when you went in, you didn't just automate what they did now. You had to look at the process, see if you could improve it, either more volume, better quality, so that they saw value in it. Because I do remember them saying, computerising something that's wrong just gives you more wrong stuff quicker. So what we want to do is make sure it's right. So it was an opportunity for the companies to step back. Some of these processes have been in place for 30, 40 years and things had changed and the process hadn't. I do remember going into the companies and thinking, what if I can't find the solution? Because often they had a problem and that's why they called us in. And I do remember thinking, what if I can't find the solution? But it never happened because they always had the solution. And as a consultant, you go in, you talk to everyone and they tell you what the solution is. And once 6 people tell you the same thing, you just think, okay, they know what it is. And you go in with it, and that's it. That's the solution.
And obviously, you had a programmer's background. Not all programmers like dealing with people.
Yeah.
Do. Obviously, you're the kind of programmer who was very comfortable dealing with people and being in the workplace. How did the programming you, I suppose, deal with that transition? And also, where did you get the capacity to think like this from? To start conceptualising organisational structures like this? Is it something you've developed, or something you felt you've always had?
I think I developed it by working at a lower level in organisations. So I would go in initially as a programmer into a customer site and I would sit and I just watch what's going on around me. And it's usually quite easy to see when something's really inefficient. Like if you go into any company and say, tell me your most inefficient process, people know what that is. And if you say to people, what would you change if you could change something? People know what they would change. Sometimes they can't, and sometimes it's not possible. But of course, with new technology, when you're coming in, it usually was possible. It was very easy to do. The thing about programmers not speaking to people and me speaking to people, I think again, I was quite a little bit different from a lot of other programmers. So a lot of them did just like to program and didn't become consultants because that's just not where they wanted to go. I think I programmed because I really loved it. It was so interesting. I just loved it. But I also enjoy working with people. So to me, that was an obvious thing that would have happened to me at some point. You know, I was never going to sit in a cube forever. It wasn't me.
And you said, when we spoke to you in the survey, you said that we asked you, how would you describe your time at DEC? You said they pushed you out of your comfort zone.
Oh, yeah.
In what sort of ways?
Well, I mean, every customer I went to, I mean, sometimes they were huge customers and I would go in, I was always terrified. I was young, probably 26, 27, and I would be walking into National Power, into maybe a power station. You know, you turn up at the front door and you just think, oh my goodness. this is me. And this young girl walks in and they're thinking, yeah, okay. And you've got to prove yourself, that get them to take you seriously. Which after a little while, I never had a problem where they didn't, but it was always something I had to prove. Whereas a lot of the people I worked with were men who had grey hair and really looked the part, and to me looked like grown-ups, and I still felt very young, like imposter syndrome and all that stuff. But yeah, every customer I went to, I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, I can't do this. I'll never find the answer. I'll never be able to do it. And of course, even though you've done it before, you just always feel, what if this is the one I can't? What if I can't deliver? So yeah, all the time. Stand up in front of these 300 people and teach them how to upgrade from this version to that version. You're standing on a podium thinking, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm doing this. Look at all these people just constantly pushing you to do things.
Obviously, something we hear is that DEC had this kind of culture of doing the right thing and personal responsibility, and people had a lot of scope to do their jobs. Did you feel that personally, that you had a lot of freedom to operate without direction, but you had a lot of responsibility as a part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I grew in confidence, I think initially I had enough scaffolding around me that I didn't feel like I was drowning. I always felt uncomfortable because I was being pushed, but I never felt that I was drowning. Or if I did, I knew where to go to get help for that. But as I got more confident, yeah, I mean, I work best when people don't question everything that I do. And, in digital, that's exactly what happened. As long as they knew that you could do it and they trusted you, and they trusted me before I knew I could be trusted, I just went out and got on with it. I mean, I was on customer sites for most of the time. And often you'd be out for 5, 6, 7 days before you came back into the office. And they weren't checking on me every 2 minutes. I would check in, but I didn't feel like people were watching what I was doing. I was just trusted to get on with it.
You said, it's interesting you said you had the scaffolding around you. What do you mean in terms of the management structure around you?
Also other people. So, the other engineers that were around, very supportive. People who were there doing the job already, a lot more senior, were very approachable. Again, for a young girl to go into an environment, it was quite scary, but very quickly they were very approachable. If I got stuck, I could phone. I remember was it Lotus Notes? And I think it was Lotus Notes, and if you had a question, you just typed it in, and one of the developers or one of the engineers would if you're on a customer site, you're the only one and something's failed, and you think, I've tried everything, type it into Lotus Notes, and within a few minutes, somebody would come back, and it was always the same people because, they were watching it. And they would come back and try this. And even though you're on your own, you never felt alone because there was always someone there to help. It felt scary, but safe.
So you had the support of other engineers, are these DEC engineers around you?
Yeah, maybe not even physically, but on the other end of a screen. But if I was in the office, we used to go into the office on the same day if we could. So maybe every second Friday or something, we'd all go in, and then it was lovely because you could chat about stuff that you all do, different projects, what you found, little quirks. Yeah, they were very, very supportive. It was a lovely environment. And my managers were always great. I never had a manager who I didn't really enjoy working for in digital.
How are the managers, what role did the manager play, I suppose, in your working life? Because obviously you were given a great deal of responsibility. You were out for days on days on end, and no one was really kind of monitoring nobody was keeping a timesheet on you, for example. So what role did the management play in your kind of working life at DEC?
They were there, I mean, from what I can remember, a lot of it was about your personal development. So they would talk to me about, any requirements or anything that was holding me back and try and move those barriers. Also, career progression, they would talk about. But also when I went in, and they did try and get us in maybe every Friday or every second Friday, they would just take you in and have a chat, how things are going. If I had a problem, I would just pick up the phone and talk to them, or go into the office and talk to them. So supportive when I needed them, and encouraging to move me on as well. Yeah, they just were kind of there making sure everything ran smoothly. Any
kind of moments you can remember where they encouraged you to move on in certain directions? The manager said this to you and pointed you in a certain direction?
I don't remember anything specific, but I did move into consulting with the same product, And I think that was more like they would give me a bigger project. So initially it's maybe just you've got this bit of a project to go and do. And eventually I moved on to bigger companies and then full projects. So I don't remember them sort of saying you should do this, you should do that, but just things sort of got bigger and more important as I got more experienced.
Well, that's an interesting point. So noticed here that you said that they pushed, as you say, they pushed you and you worked with a very supportive team. Also that you said that you referenced other companies. You said how you felt, where was that? As a woman in IT in the 80s, I was in a minority. Yeah. And we've kind of touched on that already. Just, were you aware, maybe we hear this, that DEC was trying to advance women within the environment within DEC. Were you conscious of that around you or for your own sort of career movements?
I don't remember being as conscious about it in DEC. I do feel there was times in my career where I was pushed for progression because I was a female, because they felt they should have a female at that level. Now that might not be true. I might have got it because, a promotion because I was the right person, but I think it didn't hold me back being a female because people wanted to be able to say, oh, we have a female on the board, we had a female here. When you're young though, it's harder because you don't look the part. And when I went onto customer sites, I think, they did look at me and think, what does she know? But as I got a bit older and looked a bit older, I think it definitely helped. You
mentioned one bank, was it Coots or something?
Yeah.
Tell us about that story.
I remember at some point, and it would have been in the 80s, that Coots asked for, when the team turned up, they asked for the team to be all male. They didn't want a female on site, and the female was taken off and a male was put on. That's the most openly biased thing I've heard. And I was shocked at it because although the females were in a minority, it wasn't unheard of to have a female. I just think people in those days didn't trust, I don't know why, but they didn't sort of trust women to be technical. I don't really know why that was the case. I mean, it was early days. I loved the fact that I was a female in a world of males who could do technical things. I loved the fact I could program an assembler because just so many people, even males and females, couldn't do it. And I love turning up on sites and seeing the shock in their face that they've got this female. My daughter actually works in IT and she says that even now, as a young female, because she looks very young as well, she still sort of feels it, not the same as with me. She sort of said to me, I can't imagine what life was like for you because you're one of the early ones that, 30 years later, she's doing it. And sometimes she still gets that sort of, what do you know, you're a female? It's a weird thing.
But you feel like DEC in a way had your back in a way. I mean, they were giving you more and more work, weren't they?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they ever thought, we can't put her here, we can't put her there. They would just put you anywhere. If the job was there and you were the right person, I didn't ever feel that I was held back. As I say, if anything, probably it was a benefit for me.
Tell us a little bit about some of the workplace culture at DEC. Did you get much sample of that? We hear about the fact it was a very engineering-led culture, and obviously you're an engineer. Did we hear about there were things like, it was quite shared culture, the lack of, the communal dining facilities, for example, all these kind of things. Did you ever experience this, and how did it kind of stack up? You went to a lot of very old blue blood companies, didn't you? So you got to see how other companies operated. How would you compare what you saw with them with how you saw the day-to-day team environment and the workplace culture at DEC?
It was very different. I mean, I spent a lot of time on site, on customer sites. I didn't spend a lot of time in the DEC offices. So we did only go in once a fortnight. Sometimes we were pulled in once a month because when the projects were very big, you were working on customer site and you had a team on site. And you didn't get engrossed in their culture, but you got to know it very, very well. I do remember I went to, British Aerospace, and the males were called Mr. So-and-so, and the females were called by their first name. So it was Janet and Mr. Smith. And I remember walking in thinking, this is weird. And that's what it was like. All the men were Mr. So-and-so and the women. And I think it's because the women were possibly admin secretary and the males were other jobs. And I was in the sort of director's corridor, but I was given this office because that's what happened. But I was a female and they didn't know what to call me. And it just felt really weird. And then, of course, to go into DEC then after that, I mean, you know, nothing could be further from that than DEC was. And when we went in, it was great. You know, it was very open. But I didn't spend a lot of time there. I spent a lot of time on customer sites. And I spent a lot of time in National Power. That was very old-fashioned as well. It just depended on what your customer was. I spent some time in London and Credit Suisse. They were quite modern, so they were sort of similar in a way. But in DEC, it didn't matter if you're male or female. There was none of this, you know. And even young and old, you know, I used to look at the guys who worked in government and think, wow, they're so experienced. And, you know, they were almost like gods walking about. But you didn't feel like you couldn't go and talk to them. You absolutely could. So I loved going into the office when I did. It was such a nice environment. It was so relaxed.
Which
really
offices
nice.
did you get to go into?
I was in Basing View, I think it was. There was an office there. Snampaghetti House I was in for a while. And then, as I say, we did some work in Shire Hall. Went into the other offices up here, but I didn't work in any of the ones here. I was working mainly from Basingstoke. But because I was customer based, I think it's a very different environment to somewhere like Deck Park, where they were actually sitting in day in, day out. So a different environment.
Did you get to meet many of the DEC employees at the Basingstoke offices, and did you interact with them much?
Yeah, I mean, most of the people in those offices were customer based, so we got to know them, you know, very well over time. So when you went in, you know, what would happen is we would all be in or all out. So when you were in, it felt like people were always there. But I guess the managers were always there, and we were sort of in and out. And we got to meet others, you know, when we did training. We had award ceremonies and things like that where you got to know people, because the same people tended to sort of turn up, which was nice. Got to know the engineers on your products. Because like I say, when I had a problem on site and I put a question, it would be the all-in-one engineers from Deck Park that would answer the question. So you got to know them really well. So then you would go and meet them so they would be the ones that would train us for us to go and train other people. So you got to know the engineers on your own products really well.
How important was the training you provided for other people? Because you were on this kind of like very much this pioneering wing, something new would come down and you had to inform other people in the company, I presume.
Yeah.
How important was this kind of role? What kind of things were you sort of inculcating to them?
I mean, it was really important at the time, because we would customise this product to within an inch of its life, really. And then when an upgrade came along, you would upgrade the base product, but then you would have to upgrade all the different customizations. So some of these companies had, you know, years of customization to do. So the engineers would design it all and program it all, and then they would show us, there was 4 of us that they would show, and then we would go out and train the team in the UK. So these were guys who were going out to customer sites who had to do the upgrade and then upgrade anything that had to sit on top. So everybody was, you know, every time we had a big upgrade, it was like, oh my goodness, let's get this right. Otherwise you're sort of ripping customers' business processes apart. So yeah, it was really important. It was important that filtered through well, so that these, you know, everybody who was out on a customer site knew exactly what to do and knew where to get help if not.
So how big were these kind of like sessions that you were given? Was it like lots of people in the room? Was it kind of like, what was the environment? Yeah,
I mean, well, like I say, one I remember, which was a big upgrade we did it was in Shire Hall, and I think it was the place where the council met, and it was like a courtroom where everybody was sort of sitting around us, and we were on these big podiums. So there was, you know, hundreds of engineers, on-site engineers were there. You know, just like everybody desperate to know how this was going to work, because we all knew it was coming and we all had to make sure that it was right. So yeah, it wasn't something we did every day, but you know, every time a big upgrade came, that's something that we would do.
So these companies were really depending on you and your knowledge transfer.
Oh yeah, because I mean, typically some companies did develop their own skills, but certainly initially it was always digital guys who went in and did the programming part of it and the implementation of it. So yeah, when the upgrades came, they needed to be upgraded, and often the customizations wouldn't work, so they had to be tweaked and put back in again. So yeah, it was a big process. And the more we got done, the more customers you brought on board, the bigger those processes became.
And it's such a different world today where software is so much more off the shelf, isn't it? So and knowledge of computing is so much more common. But then how would you describe the knowledge of computing and the not understanding of software back then?
Well, I mean, often companies didn't have computing departments back then, so they would bring people in. And also, you know, common APIs and things like that didn't exist. So everything you wrote was, you know, specific to your product. So it wasn't like you could take something from us and put it somewhere else. Everything was proprietary, because that just was the way it was then. Often they didn't have computing departments there, so they might bring in an operator or two operators or something like that, but they weren't, you know, some of these companies weren't sitting with an IT department like they have now. So yeah, it was a very different thing. They were relying on you to make sure that, that it all stayed working.
And were there any particularly large projects you can look back on and think you feel particularly, I don't know, really stick in your memory, things you really worked on, feel really good about?
I don't remember the detail of many. I remember the customers. I mean, we did a lot of work with National Power, but I can't for the life of me think what we actually implemented. But I remember it was a very big team and we were there for a very long time, but I can't actually remember. I remember visiting the power stations and being shown round and showing how they all worked. But I can't for the life of me think what we actually programmed, interestingly. And the same thing, I remember going to Credit Suisse. I was there for 9 months on site. And again, I can't remember the actual process. British Aerospace, I remember the building, the people. So, I mean, it must have been, you know, I guess they were all just different and specific to their businesses.
But you were working on some big projects. I mean, you mentioned Western Helicopter as well.
Oh, they were so cool. Yeah, Western Helicopter was so cool. They were so cool because of the helicopters. I love that. I love going on to sites with customers like that, because like National Power, Western Helicopters, you're just sitting there. I think I said to you that I was in a meeting and you heard this noise and suddenly this helicopter came up by the windows outside the meeting, and I was just looking at all these helicopters and everyone else just carries on with the meeting. And I was thinking, there's a helicopter out there, it's huge. And then to go in and see the factory where they actually put them all together, stuff like that was so cool. I got lots of good stuff like that. So cool.
Are you how important was it to have this passion for the job, do you think?
I think in those days we all had it, because it was one of these jobs that you did if you were passionate about it, because it wasn't, you know, a job that everybody knew and, you know, I'll go and be a teacher, I'll go and be a lawyer, I'll be a doctor. It was something that it wasn't out there a lot. So I think, and also when I started, it was only really computer scientists that did the job. So we were all very similar. I left the IT industry because I didn't like the fact that you didn't need skills anymore to do the job. And I didn't like the fact that people didn't have the knowledge that they needed to make decisions and write programs and stuff, and it was all very inefficient. And I just got to the point where I thought, I just don't like this anymore. And that's why I left the IT industry ultimately, because it just became completely de-skilled. And I just saw lots of people writing code that was so inefficient in the memory, and I'll just get some more memory, inefficient on disk space, get some more disk space. In my day, you know, as an assembler programmer, it was, don't use that, don't use this, we've only got this many bytes, blah, blah, blah. And it just became something that everybody could do. So yeah, it's a very different world now to what it was then.
I mean, the system, also it's interesting because I hear a lot about DEC open systems, but they weren't open, were they? They were open if you were a DEC customer.
Yeah.
And yet it was extremely popular. What was it about DEC that the customers, obviously all-in-one was a compelling suite, what was it about DEC do you think worked for customers?
I think the fact that they were mini computers, you didn't need these massive computer suites, which were all air conditioned. And I mean, you still needed that stuff, but nothing like the size of an IBM mainframe. You know, the fact they were mini computers and not mainframes was fantastic. And I think in the day that was quite unique. I mean, I know there were others around, but digital were seen as one of the best. And I think lots of people just wanted that. It was modern, it was smaller, it was more trendy, you know, and it worked. And you had a huge amount of power. And in those days, you were going from something that was absolutely massive to something that was, you know, much more manageable. You could fit it into a small room. I was going to say you didn't have to reinforce the floor, but sometimes you still had to do that because the discs were so heavy. But yeah, I think it just opened up doors. You know, some smaller companies would never have been able to afford a mainframe, but they would buy bits of a mainframe from someone else, and then suddenly they could have their own. And I think it just opened up lots of doors for people.
And working for this company. How did you feel? You're going out there on your own. It sounds like a solo pilot.
Often on my own, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
sometimes with a team, but often on your own.
How do you feel? Do you feel like you're really out there, like on the cutting edge of things, working as an ambassador for this company?
I mean, you did. I mean, obviously the sales team had been in, and sometimes you were involved in the pre-sale stuff just to sort of say what was possible to do. And then the sale would go through, and then you would go in and try and actually implement what was sold. But yeah, you're always an ambassador for the company. You had to make it work. You had to be professional. You had to look the part. I always felt like I needed to represent the company well because I was proud of the company. So I wanted to make sure that I did them justice all the time.
You had 3 excellence awards, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So tell me about those. And one of your certificates is on your wall at home, isn't it?
Yeah, I've still got 2 of them on my wall. They changed how they looked. So I've got the 2 original ones, and then they sort of got a more modern one, which I don't know where that is, but the other 2 are still on my wall. They were great because the sales guys had awards every year, and they used to go away places and, I don't know, have a great time. And then at some point, I can't remember when, they started having service awards. So I was in the service side as opposed to sales. And they just picked a few people, and I don't even know how they did it, but there was a small percentage of the guys who went out onto customer sites post-sales, who they sort of picked out, and you got a letter to say you have won this award. And they took you away to a 5-star hotel. And again, I was quite young. I'd never been in a 5-star hotel. So it was so exciting. And your partner came with you, and they wined and dined you. We had all these lovely, events and big meal, big presentation where you went up onto the stage and they gave you your award. It was really, really cool. They did them every year, and I won 3 in the time that I was there. So it was, really, really great. I felt so special. It was great. Great motivator.
Yeah, and you still have them at home?
Still have them on my wall in my study. They're still there. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And do you think, that was great. Other people had these awards as well. I mean, within other people received these. What kind of that environment was that creating for the staff, do you think?
I mean, I'm sort of in 2 minds about that because obviously the people who didn't get the award were thinking, well, I've worked just as hard and I do just as much, and it's because the face fits and all that sort of stuff. And I would be disappointed if I didn't win it. The years I didn't win them, I was disappointed. But you never looked at the person and thought they don't deserve it. You might think I deserve it, but you never thought they don't, because they never picked people that. I mean, DEC was full of amazing people. The guys I worked with were absolutely amazing. They were so good at their job. You would never think, oh, they don't deserve it. So I don't know how other people felt, but I loved it. It was such good fun. It was a world that I hadn't really lived in. It was great fun. I remember it so well now, just walking into that first 5-star hotel and the guy coming to take your cases, and I was thinking, what is he doing? I could carry my own case, but no, he had to have it. And with behind his back going, do we tip him? What do we do? How does this work? Just it's just such good fun.
And do you think that, obviously we hear a lot about the DEC culture, the DEC way, and doing the right thing, and we talked about this huge amount of freedom you had in the role and responsibility. Focusing on this, doing the right thing, did that filter through into your work? Because Ken Olsen was good at this message, wasn't he, about doing right by the customer and loyalty to the customer. Did that kind of feed your own thinking, do you think, how you approach customers?
I don't know where that customer ethos came from, but we definitely felt a great sense of loyalty to our customers as well as to DEC. Fortunately, in my experience, it never conflicted. But I definitely felt when I was on a customer site that I was there to deliver something of value to them. I never had a situation where I felt I was conflicted with what DEC wanted me to do and what the customer wanted me to do. It always kind of felt in sync, which is fortunate because I'm not sure what I guess I would have done what DEC wanted me to do, but I think customers kind of felt like I was on their side. And that's what you want if you're on a customer site for a period of time.
Do you feel other customers of other tech companies experience that similar level from their tech suppliers, or do you think that was something DEC managed to get right?
I don't really know about other companies. I know that DEC got it right because I mean, all the customers I worked with were very happy. I don't know if that's just the projects I worked on. I guess you didn't hear a lot about unpopular projects or implementations. But at the time, everything was growth, like you couldn't give enough to people. There was more people wanted the product than you could ever provide. And it was a real time of growth. We did hit, sort of towards the end, we hit a point where they were making people redundant. But again, it was kind of in the periphery of where I was. I didn't really see an awful lot of it. But I guess I don't know what happened after I left. But when I was there, it was just all growth, and it was just the good days.
So when did you leave? Just it was after 8 years, I think. Wasn't it?
Yeah, so it would have been, what would it have been, about 94-ish. I left.
So some changes haven't happened in DEC by that point. Ken's gone, and
Yeah.
there's been some restructuring, hasn't there? Did you notice any of this starting to filter through to what you were doing?
Again, it was kind of on the periphery. I remember there was redundancies announced, and I remember there were redundancies, but it didn't really affect me. I do remember thinking, oh, that's a lot of money. Because at first I think the redundancy payments were quite good, I seem to remember. But they weren't ones you could volunteer for. It was, there were certain roles I think were made redundant rather than people, individuals. But yeah, it was on the periphery. Again, I was out on customer sites, and I don't know if I was protected from it, but I didn't have it didn't impact me a lot initially.
So what was the circumstances in which you left DEC?
I left DEC to go and do some consulting on my own. And I think the reason I did it was money, because at the time you could get an awful lot of money for being a contractor. I was working with mobile phone companies, and again, sort of early 90s, that was very new. They were only used really for phone calls and the occasional text that you had to press the numbers to get. Very up and coming, lots and lots of money around. And I actually moved from DEC to work on one of the mobile phone dealers, Talkland it was. And I had to get permission to do that, because obviously it was an existing customer. But I think at the time they were looking to reduce the headcount, and they didn't make me redundant. They wouldn't. I did try, they wouldn't. But they sort of said, yeah, that's fine, because I still worked with the same people, but I worked independently at that time. And it was primarily to get lots of money to pay off some of my mortgage.
So you left to become a consultant, and then you went for Vodafone, I think. Was that correct?
Yeah. So I worked with Talkland, which was the project that crossed over, and then Vodafone bought Talkland, then I ended up moving to Vodafone. And what did you do there? I worked in billing. So what we were doing was we were putting a system in the shops where you could sell mobile phones. So the sale of a mobile phone is a real long business process, but it's the same every time. You do the credit check, you set up the phone on the network, you set up the billing information, you attach the phone, and then you go. So when I was in DEC, we were actually putting that process into Talkland, which was one of the big dealers. When Vodafone bought them over, we then started to roll it out across all of the dealer sites, and then it backed onto the billing system. So the network was a different part of Vodafone. I worked in billing, so they would give us the call detail, we would price it, and produce the bills for the customers. So I started off again on the business side, so business process tracking, very similar. How do we get it from the shop right through to the bill at the end of the day?
How big a role is this? How important is it?
I think at the time, when I went to Vodafone, I ran the business process side, and then I became responsible for all of the development of just that bit. And eventually I ended up as the IT exec of the billing division in the UK. So it just kind of went from strength to strength again. But it was lovely there, because I was an operations manager for a couple of years. So I am operating the data centres where all the billing stuff's done. Sometimes it was the business side and the programming, did the migration of all the the shops onto this system. Worked with an Israeli company called Amdocs who had this billing system that we put in. We migrated all the data from the old system to the new system. And I was just a part of that team. Great team, really lovely. Yeah, really, really highly skilled IT people again. Yeah, it's great, loved it. I've always loved my jobs. I've had great jobs.
How, I suppose the question is, the obvious question is, how did life and work at DEC prepare you for a career at Vodafone?
Oh, I think it gave me the foundation. So all the analysis skills, the ability to walk into a business and see a process and be able to document it, and also getting the customers to get on board. Because often you would go in here and you were pushing, and nobody wanted it. Often you would say, oh, we've got this great new thing, I don't want that, I've got a bit of paper that does it, I don't need it. And there was a lot of that. And when I went to start working with Vodafone, we were going into shops saying we're going to automate this. Well, they had phones that they called credit checking, so there's a lot of resistance to IT. So all the skills I learned in digital, how to influence people and how to sort of get them on board, and the idea of a pilot and feeding that back and getting them to get ownership of the IT, all that stuff was, fantastic. And also, all the writing stuff I did, the communication side of it, talking to people, you're walking into somewhere I don't know, all that stuff was what made me into the person that I could go and do the Vodafone job. So it was great. And I became a manager, so I managed a lot of people, and what I learned from my managers in digital, because that was very early days for me, that I took with me, and the fact they were so approachable, and there was never a blame culture. Whereas when I went into the mobile phone industry, there was mobile phone dealers, there was a lot of blame everywhere. And it was just very refreshing to not have that, because I kind of brought that. Vodafone was quite an old-fashioned company, so I could bring a lot of the sort of more modern stuff from digital and take it into that environment. So our little bit was actually really lovely to, I don't know what the other bits were like, I'm not saying they weren't lovely, but our bit was a lovely sort of modern place to work, which was great. Yeah, it's a lovely team.
And I suppose how as being a techie, obviously we have lots of consultants out there who don't have the technical chops that you have. How has having that technical aspect to your career helped you become a better consultant?
Oh, it was invaluable again, because when I was on a customer site, if people always assume I don't have a lot of knowledge, I don't know why, but they do. And often when I was on a customer site, we'd be in a room and something wouldn't be working, and we'd have the flip chart there, and somebody would say something and I'd be like, talk me through it. And they start talking at a very high level. Just tell me about this. And you just mention a few words and they go, oh, okay, she knows about that. And then we'd go into more detail. And it really helped, because I could drop into quite a lot of technical detail about disk usage, memory usage, networking, programming, testing, the whole life cycle of a project. And I could just dip into it because I'd sort of jumped around those jobs in my work. A lot of that would be with digital because the training was so good. So it's helped massively. And when the higher up I went, the more valuable it was, because you're here and you're working with programmers, and then you go here, you've got programmers and testers, and then you go to here and you've got operations, programmers, testers. So because I'd sort of had that great experience, it allowed me to have a little bit of knowledge, just enough to bluff my way into a meeting and say, tell me about that. And then often what would happen is they would then go, oh, hang on a minute. And then the answer would come out. So it was really valuable.
Do you still feel that sense of anxiety, imposter syndrome?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It hasn't gone away?
No, I know. I think you're either that kind of person or you're not. I can bluff quite well. Quite good at bluffing now. As an older adult, I can bluff. I didn't do that so well as a younger person.
But the pressure was on you as a younger person, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To definitely prove.
I had to prove. I still have to prove, but yeah, I don't feel I've got to prove myself as much, because I guess I'm not trying to progress a career. Whereas when I was younger, it was always pressure to be the best.
Was DEC kind of a high pressure environment? Obviously, we talked about they kept pushing you out, or they pushing you out your comfort zone, or pushing the boundaries of your comfort zone, but also the confidence of your plate was getting bigger the whole time, wasn't it? But they seemed to do it with all the best intentions, didn't they? But we hear about people burning out, especially in today's workplace. Was DEC like that, or would they kind of not allow that to happen to you?
I mean, it wasn't easy, for sure. You weren't in there, like relaxed and enjoying yourself. It wasn't like now where people were burning out all the time. I see a lot of people burning out now. I don't know why it's so much worse. Because I think we were supported. There wasn't hundreds of thousands of us doing the job. And therefore, I guess there was fewer of us and we were just well looked after. I don't remember. I mean, there was times in a project where you felt a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. But it wasn't constant. It wasn't... And people knew at that time that you needed support, and I felt that that's what I got. But it was a very different world to now. I see a lot of pressure around me and a lot of stress. I still work with IT companies in a very small way, and the companies that I work with, I would say they don't have the same depth of skills, but I don't think anyone does anymore.
Did DEC have that depth of skills? Was that a generation? Was it DEC, or was it of the time that those skills were more present?
A bit of both, I think. I think only people with those skills were as involved with companies like DEC because they were one of the big ones. It was the ones you wanted to work for that got those kind of people. And you didn't have IT people like lots and lots and lots. Well, everyone's got IT people now. But I think when you work for someone like DEC, I guess, or any of the other big companies, you were one of the guys who were very well trained because they did a lot of training.
And did you see that paying off of your colleagues? Were they kind of well supported? Did you see any mechanisms or programs in place that helped them either mentally or kind of like sort of mental health wise, or other issues, what might take called wellness or career advancement?
When I was in digital, we didn't really talk a lot about well-being and mental health and stuff like that in those days. We just we were all very well supported. We supported each other. I remember the team I was in. As I say, there was 4 of us, and we all supported each other. I certainly felt very supported, and I would try and support everybody else as well. I wasn't aware of anybody, burning out or anything like that. We knew there was big projects, and we knew when they were going live, and when they had these big pinch points. But I don't remember ever feeling that I needed support or that they needed support and didn't get it. I mean, I guess when we were really stressed, we would have a day in the office and go back in, and it was a really nice environment to just go and like offload to people. So we had that. It wasn't really a thing.
So let's talk about just briefly the end of DEC, I suppose. All things come to an end, but you already left. You saw it go down, I suppose, from outside. The ship went down without you.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
So
How did you feel about that?
I was gutted. It was so sad. I mean, I guess that when I left, it was just starting. I mean, I remember a meeting where Ken Olsen said, PCs will never, I can't remember the words he used, but basically they'll never take off. Because I think at the time Bill Gates had said there'll be a PC in every home. And I remember Ken Olsen saying, that's not going to happen, that's not the future. And I didn't know either way what was going to happen, but you could see what was happening in the world, particularly from outside DEC. And it kind of felt like they needed to move with the trends more than they were doing. And then, of course, Compaq came along and PC Company, talk about salt in the wound, and bought them over. Absolutely gutted. But, you could see what was happening. It was sad. But it happened to all the companies. Look at IBM now, look at all the big ones.
But you kept a memento of that as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
What's your memento?
Well, my husband did say to me, you realise you were supposed to return that. So I kept 1 share. I remember we had to sell all our digital shares. And I remember at the time I said, I'm going to keep 1 because then they'll have to send me a share certificate, which they did. And I've got this beautiful, lovely embossed share certificate, and it's 1 digital share. And again, that's up on my study wall and has been for many, many years. Because it's a lovely place. I've got a lot to thank DEC for with my career. So yeah, I love it. And the fact I've still got that stuff there means a lot.
What do you think DEC got right? Why should people feel this emotional connection like you do to the company, a company that's thousands and thousands of people and doesn't exist anymore?
Oh, it's so sad, isn't it? What did they do right? I don't know. I mean, for me, it was just such a supportive environment in terms of not just the people, but the training. The products were really good. The timing was really good. it wasn't easy, but it was never hard to get people to understand how good the product was and how much benefit they could see from it. And that was a lovely environment. I mean, you were selling stuff and implementing stuff that was making a positive difference to people's working environment. And working with people who were similar to you, who were enthusiastic, well-trained, just real professional people in my bit. I just absolutely loved it. I don't look back of it and think, I can't really think of anything negative about it. In my experience, it was such a great growth environment. But we were living in growth times in those days. I didn't really see it when it all started to go wrong.
What do you think DEC's legacy is in the world as a whole, and possibly to you?
I don't know about the world. Do people still remember DEC apart from us? I don't know.
Why should people remember DEC?
I think they should remember it for the technology. I think the mini computer was a huge step to where we are now, and I think that's why it should be remembered.
Why was it a huge step?
Because it took us from, mainframes were things that weren't accessible to companies. It was accessible to a few very large companies, but it wasn't accessible to everybody, and I think a mini computer was. And it kind of led then to the personal computer, because it was just like a step from these massive mainframes to something you could have in an office to something on your desk. And to me, that was a stepping stone to where we are now, to something you've got in your hand now, isn't it? It's come all the way. But it was such a huge leap in technology. I think that is the legacy. For me, it was just, it was very much my formative years. And it just provided me an organisation and an environment where I could grow and just become something that I was proud of. And that was just a lovely feeling at that stage in my career.
Does it still shape you today, do you think, DEC?
Yeah, I think it does. Like I said, a lot of the skills that I learned, like the stuff I talked about earlier about, communicating effectively and, all the business process type stuff, I still use that now. I certainly did when I was working. And even now, I'm doing some voluntary work at a school where they were having real problems with their IT supplier, and I've sort of just helped them sort that out. And a lot of the skills that I used and learned way back at the beginning are the skills I'm using now, about, what service level have you got? How are you going to improve it? Just like being the customer, knowing what they've got available from a customer side, it really helps to know what it's like inside.
That's it, thank you.
Thank you very much.